two people he loved above all others, his wife and his son, but circumstances had blessed him with the means to hire professionals to search for them. That they had failed hadn't diminished the fact that he could afford to take those steps. Not that any of the PIs Robert hired had had any success, Mallory reminded herself. It had been Susanna Jones, a member of Robert's own staff, who'd eventually found Beth's missing car. But the point was that he could afford to hire an army of investigators. Most people were not that fortunate. The Foundation was intended to do for them what they could not do for themselves: get the best investigators on the case. While still in its infancy, the Foundation had taken only 2 cases, but both of those had met with success. There had been an overwhelming response to their solicitation of applicants for their services, as well as their call for experienced law enforcement personnel to add to their staff. Mallory was charged with the task of sorting through all the applications and pulling out those cases that might best benefit from their services. She was also responsible for reviewing hundreds and hundreds of resumes to find those individuals she thought might best meet the Foundation's needs. On her desk, she had both their next case and, she hoped, their next hire. The letter from Lynn Walker had captured her imagination even before she'd read through the news articles that accompanied it. Lynn's husband had been murdered under very odd circumstances, and the cop in Mallory couldn't help but be enticed by the challenge. Even now, she couldn't stop herself from reading through the file again. The body of Ross Walker, a construction supervisor, had been found behind the soup kitchen where he and Lynn volunteered one night every week. The torso had been stabbed repeatedly and left posed, seated against the fence with a very large hamburger from a fast food restaurant stuffed into his mouth. The police investigation had been at a standstill almost since the very beginning. Whoever had murdered Ross Walker had been careful to leave no trace of himself, and interviews with the folks who'd been in and out of the kitchen had proved fruitless. No one had seen or heard anything. Yet someone had gone to a lot of trouble to kill Ross Walker and leave his body in plain sight. The man's widow had submitted it to the Foundation for consideration. After more than a year, she wanted to move on, wanted her children to be able to start a new life. But not knowing who had killed her husband and why was keeping them all stuck in that moment when the doorbell rang and her 7-year-old son had opened it to find 2 police officers standing on their front porch. Yes, this case would do nicely. Mallory hoped the others on the selection committee would agree. Mallory turned her attention to the second folder on her desk and opened it. Over the past several weeks, she'd reviewed hundreds of resumes from law enforcement officers from every agency and just about every state. She had been separating them into 2 piles: interview and toss. At the top of the interview pile sat the resume of Samuel J. Delvecchio, who had spent the past 16 years with the FBI, most recently as a profiler. A resume like that moved Sam Delvecchio to the very top of Mallory's most wanted list. For one thing, she reasoned, a former FBI agent would have a lot of contacts within the Bureau, contacts that could prove invaluable, not only for this case but for future cases as well. For another, he'd worked just about every kind of crime imaginable, and would bring a wealth of experience to the Foundation. Kidnappings, sex crimes, white slavery, serial killers. Samuel Delvecchio had seen them all. Mallory went back to Ross Walker's folder and pulled out a newspaper article that included part of an interview the local chief of police had given 3 months after the murder. That the body had been posed carefully suggested that the killer was sending a message, he was quoted as saying, but what that message was and who was supposed to receive it, well, no one had figured that out. Mallory figured an FBI profiler might be able to do exactly that. Yes, Samuel Delvecchio looked like he just might be the right guy. Sam Delvecchio stopped at the gate that blocked entry onto the grounds owned by Robert Magellan and waited for the guard to wave him through. The gate swung aside, and Sam drove his rental car along the drive that wound past an island of newly planted trees. When Magellan's Tudor mansion came into view, Sam hit the brake. Although he'd seen pictures of the house